the Israeli military's civilian coordination arm announced that the Zikim Crossing in northern Gaza has been reopened for humanitarian aid trucks, marking the first time that this route has been operational since the ceasefire came into effect on October 10th. The announcement came on Wednesday when the coordinator of government activities in the territories, COGAT, declared, "Today, the Zikim Crossing has been opened for the entry of humanitarian aid trucks into the Gaza Strip." The crossing serves what aid agencies describe as one of the most devastated regions of the enclave, where access has been critically constrained and parts of the population are believed to be facing famine-level conditions. Located in the far north, the Zikim route had been closed for approximately 2 months following a security shutdown. Its reopening raises questions about whether meaningful relief can now reach the hardest-hit areas. COGAT added that the aid entering through Zikim, supplied by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and other international groups, will be subject to thorough security inspections by Israel's Land Crossings Authority. The body noted the reopening came at the directive of political leadership. Even as the crossing is unlocked, major obstacles remain. Infrastructure in northern Gaza is shattered, supply chains severely disrupted, and the volume of aid entering remains far below what was promised. Under the terms of the ceasefire, Israel committed to allowing a minimum of 600 aid and commercial trucks per day into the Gaza Strip. But independent monitoring shows that the actual daily flow has averaged as low as 178 trucks, most of them commercial rather than purely humanitarian. Meanwhile, UN agencies say some vital items, including syringes for vaccines and bottles for powdered baby milk, are still being blocked or delayed. While the reopening of Zikim may send a positive signal, humanitarian actors caution that the reality on the ground is far more complex. Northern Gaza faces collapsed roads, destroyed warehouses, and extensive debris. Even when trucks pass through the border crossing, distribution to residents remains not only difficult but often dangerous. Aid workers speak of long wait times at checkpoints, convoys delayed for days, and subsequent difficulties reaching neighbourhoods that have been flattened. In parallel with the aid story, a separate but closely connected effort is underway: the retrieval of the bodies of the remaining Israeli captives held in Gaza. The armed wing of Hamas, the Al-Qassam Brigades, has said its members, working alongside teams from the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, are preparing to enter zones inside the so-called Yellow Line, areas still under Israeli military control, to search for remains. In a statement, the Al-Qassam Brigades declared, "We are ready to work on extracting the bodies of Israeli enemy prisoners inside the Yellow Line at the same time and in all places in order to close this file." Under the terms of the first phase of the ceasefire deal, Hamas was to hand over the bodies of 5 more captives. Those returns remain outstanding. For Israel, the recovery and handover of those remains a sensitive component of the broader agreement and a key indicator of whether the truce can hold. Observers point out that the 2 tracks, the humanitarian access into Gaza and the recovery of captive bodies, are interconnected. A sustained increase in aid truck numbers and a smooth retrieval operation would signal that momentum is building for the next phase of the deal. Conversely, further delays or breakdowns risk undermining trust between the parties and jeopardizing prospects of escalation. On the humanitarian side, while the reopening of Zikim represents a tangible step, many question whether it will be more than symbolic. Even with access opened, agencies emphasize that the critical measure is whether the volume and variety of supplies match the scale of need and whether they reach the beleaguered populations in the north rather than remaining at the border or central hubs. Deliveries must include not only basic foodstuffs, but also medical supplies, baby formula, and fuel for hospitals and pumping stations. Meanwhile, the retrieval operation is highly sensitive and technically challenging. The Yellow Line demarcation spans areas that have been heavily damaged during months of bombardment and ground operations. Some hostages or remains may be in tunnels, buildings reduced to rubble, or zones still contaminated by unexploded ordnance. The Al-Qassam Brigade's call for mediators and the ICRC to bring equipment reflects the scale of the logistical hurdles the search presents. For Israel, the opening of Zikim offers an opportunity to showcase compliance with international and domestic pressure to ease humanitarian suffering. But Israeli officials also frame the process in security terms. Inspections of the aid delivery, prevention of arms diversion, and maintaining oversight of crossings remain central. Israeli statements continue to accuse Hamas of interference, including diversion of supplies, while Hamas denies the allegations and insists that access has been obstructed by Israeli restrictions. The unfolding developments in Gaza will be closely watched by international actors. The United States, Egypt, Qatar and the UN have played key roles in brokering the ceasefire and are now engaged in monitoring implementation. The immediate question is whether the number of trucks entering Gaza will rise significantly above the current average and whether the types of supplies will broaden to meet critical unmet needs. Simultaneously, whether the body retrieval effort makes visible progress will factor heavily into whether the broader agreement moves to phase 2, which envisions further prisoner exchanges, broader aid access and possibly longer-term stabilization arrangements. As of now, the reopening of the Zikim Crossing and the announcement of the joint retrieval search mark meaningful steps. But the humanitarian crisis in northern Gaza remains dire, with people facing severe shortages of food, medicine, fuel and shelter. The success of these efforts will be assessed not by announcements, but by what reaches the ground. Trucks delivering life-saving aid, bodies returned to families, and a reduction in waiting lists, hunger levels and disease outbreaks. For the people of Gaza, every additional truck matters. For the governments and mediators, the clock is ticking. Failure to deliver may erode goodwill and make renewed conflict more likely. The coming days will therefore serve as a litmus test for the truce's durability. If aid flows continue to lag and retrieval operations stall, the risk grows that frustration and distrust will spiral into renewed hostilities. Conversely, if truck numbers climb and remains are recovered, the ceasefire may gain much-needed credibility and open space for what comes next. In the end, the reopening of the Zikim Crossing and the planned retrieval of captive bodies represent more than operational developments. They are tests of political will and humanitarian conscience. Every convoy that makes it through the crossing, every life-saving package that reaches families in Gaza's north, and every recovered body that returns to grieving relatives carries symbolic weight. These actions determine whether the fragile ceasefire evolves into a foundation for stability or collapses under the burden of mistrust and unmet promises. What happens next will depend on whether both sides and the international mediators who brokered this pause can translate these tentative steps into sustained relief and accountability. The Zikim trucks are not just vehicles of aid. They are moving indicators of diplomacy and restraint. Their passage could either open a path toward rebuilding and reconciliation or mark another brief pause before a return to devastation. For the people on both sides of the border, the stakes could not be higher.